Where would you find the intersection between fine arts and fashion? I've studied both classic and contemporary art, and I often see shared ideas in runaways and magazines, but the actual stores don't. Yes, unfortunately, even though a lot of, let's say, designers are very artistic in their practice, commerce always takes over. So then what tends to happen is buyers don't buy it, customers don't buy stuff. So then all the artful stuff just becomes like, you find it in art galleries and in installations and in museums, but you don't see people wearing it, or you can't actually buy it anywhere. And some of my favorite brands are like this. So there's a brand that I'm a really big fan of. Yeah, so there's this London brand called Harry, and they make sculptures using this like latex fabric. But I've noticed recently, they've started to kind of like find ways to make it kind of more commercial and more wearable in a way. But I really like it, the way like the clothing is presented. Like you see a lot of, like Harry does a lot of art installations, and like you see a lot of it in different exhibitions and stuff, and it's really cool. But I don't think I've ever seen anyone like wear this stuff, but I find it so interesting. It's really cool. So if you go to runaways, you go to art galleries, you go to fashion museums, art will always meet fashion. But if you kind of want that in a commercial sense, I think that's a lot more difficult to find, to be honest. Hello, Dami, how are you?
Hello. How's everyone doing? I'm Laurent.
We are good.
Yo, I love Harry, and I love the two Gentle Monster have this world that they're building in terms of product and the engineering that they have in terms of the glasses as well. It's like, yeah, it's just amazing. They just sell art to you also, but yeah, Harry takes the biscuit sometimes.
No, I totally agree. I'm a big fan, and I was gutted because I couldn't make it to their last runway show, but I'm definitely going to make sure I make it to the next one. So interesting. Let's see. Fine arts mixing with fashion is a luxury of brands who don't have to worry about sales, like the Comme des Garçons family, even though they say they make clothes but still end up in fine art spaces. Yeah, I think Comme des Garçons is so interesting because their setup is very different to anyone else, because they do have to worry about sales, in the sense that if Comme des Garçons Play doesn't make money, and all the Dover Street markets don't make money, and, you know, CDG Black and all those lines don't make money, then mainline ceases to exist. So in a way, they do have to worry about sales, but just not via the mainline. They have to worry about sales in all the other avenues that they use, like the perfumes and that sort of stuff. But they've done it successfully for how many years? I think that Adrian Joff is an absolute genius when it comes to business. So yeah, I definitely agree. I think it is definitely a luxury though. It's very few brands that have that sort of setup to where they can have a whole line that's just totally artistic, and it's like, our intention is not even to make money or to sell any of these clothes at all. Dami, what are you going to say?
I would say though that in terms of the CDG in particular, actually before I say that, I said it in chat, but yeah, Dolce Jeans, his channel's wavy. You guys watch Locking and everything like that. But for CDG and like any other brand, so like even Loewe is part of this. In fact, Gentle Monster is part of this as well, because commerce is an integral part of the business in terms of fashion. The way that the art of space sees it is totally different, and that's kind of the same thing with, you know, when artists kind of jump into fashion, which is why you get so many different collaborations with fine artists, because that is the best way to create synergies, right? Because, and you know, it's one of those things where the artist is able to sell more pieces, and you know, the brand is able to see more luxury, more in tune with the culture of the people that they're selling to in turn, right? So if they think, like with Dior for instance, like if they think, oh yeah, they know these artisans up in Ukraine for that collection that was, I think, 2 seasons ago, or with, like, let's say Kim Jones and the Nigerian artists or Ghanaian artists, people are like, oh, so you know our culture just as well. Let me clue in, because I know there's quite a few people that didn't look at Dior until that collection, right? So just to wrap up my thought, it's like when an artist makes clothes, it's seen as merch to a lot of fashion people, and when fashion people try to like interject or like intercede into the art business, it seems like, you know, a commercial play. So the best way to do that is generally collaborations with fashion designers, because you got to think fashion places have the best factories and like the best deals for factories, and you know, art people have the best like audiences in terms of that particular audience, in terms of like concentration of wealthy people.
Yeah, and I think something also interesting about the conversation is I've had this conversation with a few of my friends that are artists. They always say that as an artist, when you get really involved in fashion, you almost over commercialize your practice because of the way that your artwork is used. Like, think of, I don't know, Cause. Like, the way that Cause is used when Cause collaborates with like Dior or like different brands, like how the practice is just reduced to like prints on prints on prints on prints, and it's just like, okay, how many times can we print this on a t-shirt and make maximum money? Or like Cause and Uniqlo and all that sort of stuff. So that's also another thing where I don't know if I can say that, but fashion sometimes, because fashion is so commercial, it waters down a lot of art, which is why it's hard to like be really artistic with fashion as the medium, because it's like everything has to still be commercialized. Like, these things still need to be worn, unless it's CDG mainline or something like that. But those kind of things are rare. I actually don't know many other lines outside of CDG mainline where literally the specific intention is like, yeah, some of this stuff, like, we have absolutely no intention to sell this stuff. Like, zero.
Like, literally, unless it is that, like, and I don't know whether it's snobby, but the best comparison I can say, it's like your favorite musician going mainstream. Do you know what I mean? So when it comes to the art world, it's like, oh, you're going mainstream, you're trying to sell a lot of pieces, da 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 da. So that's why there's a lot of grants, there's a lot of bursaries, there's a lot of like prizes for artists, so that they never have to feel the need to go mainstream. And like, speaking to art advisors and people in the art world, there is this like kind of nexus event that happens when you kind of change your ideals in terms of, oh, because we know that these fashion entities have like manufacturing facilities, as in like people like slave labor, let me just say it, slave labor. It's like, oh, you're an artist that loves the environment, or you're an artist that, you know, loves downtrodden people, and you speak about that in your work, but then you're allowing this, you know, entity to create with their slave labor so you can make more money.
When you says, can you use this as a jump off to talk about your opinion about fashion not being art? So obviously I've made a video about this, but I think this always like starts a massive fight, but I'm okay to have the conversation. But it's just the reason why I don't think fashion is art in the purest sense of the word is because fashion is an industry where the ultimate intention is to sell a garment to be worn. And like, when you think of, you know, like the art, like the actual definition of art, the definition of literally has to do with like producing works primarily for their beauty or emotional power. So if there's like a ultra functional function for something, like it has to be worn, we have to design armholes regardless, because you have to put your arms through it, it starts taking away more and more from, you know, the true essence of what art is by definition. But I also think it's a spectrum, right? So if there's a whole spectrum, like, I don't know, H&M and Zara would be all the way on this end of the spectrum, and CDG mainline would be all the way on this end of the spectrum, if like this is a fashion art spectrum, right? So you also have to think that it's not like a simple thing. Like, every single brand and designer sits somewhere on that spectrum, and some brands are so close to art it might as well be art, like CDG mainline, but some all the way on the other end, like Zara or H&M.
Yeah, that was good explanation, to be honest. Like, from my purview, especially someone that kind of sits at an intersection at this present moment in time, you won't see many people that are entrenched in the art sphere thinking about fashion and saying it's art. It's like, you can have like an artsy decor for your home, but at the end of the day, that is still a coffee table, that is still a bed, that is still a thing, an entity that is there for a use case. Whereas painting can be home decor, but then it can also be something that can move a nation based on its reality. Like, just the fact that it exists, it can help change perspectives and people's views. So yeah.
And then also, like, fashion is vast. So like, when you say it's fashion art, like, fashion is the same industry where like slave labor and like even like the science of it, like textiles, and like there's so many aspects to the fact it's like
engineering in fashion, everything. So it's like, fashion can be artsy, it won't be considered art to the large swath, right? I'm not saying everybody, but a large swath of people within art. Obviously, if you are a person who sees fashion as art because you can, you know, wear it in multiple different ways, and you're adorning your body, and, you know, you want to be living art and art sculpture, for instance, then within the sphere that you operate in, you'll probably be seen as that. But then when you start moving to, let's say, the art sphere, which is where like a kind of put CDG mainline for sure, but then Loewe, you have this massive intersection of people in art wearing Loewe, then that is probably the best media in terms of, oh, this is a creative thing. Like we have, grass growing on clothes. You know what I'm saying? It's like a different type of thing. And that sits, exactly what I said, the spectrum, it sits closer to the CDG mainline rather than the Zara side. And that is, totally fine, because you will see a lot of people in art, regardless of, oh, this is slave labor, all of this stuff. A lot of people are just fashionable in the art space. Like, just as much they love to decorate their homes or to collect artists, they love to wear clothes that do and feel exactly the same.
Let's say Dolce said, so the runways shows could sometimes be considered closer to art than the clothes themselves sometimes, correct? Yeah, definitely. I think it depends on your definition of art. Art to me is creating something. Every industry is capitalistic. There's people who make products and then people who make art, and some that do both. Yeah, which is why it goes back to my point about the spectrum. That's why there's a spectrum, because some people is more commercial, some people are more artistic. That's why you have the spectrum, and then different people sit on that spectrum. What are you going to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say that the fashion shows are considered a production. They can have installations that are art pieces per se, right? But it is still a production. It happens for 90 minutes to sell clothes and to be awe-inspiring. But at the end of the day, it ends and then it leaves, right? So the closest thing into art it can be is an installation. And just to the point that you just read out, there's art on one end of the spectrum, like Jeff Koons. He's, a very commercially viable artist, and he sells a lot, and he sells for a lot as well. But then there's, and Andy Warhol is somewhere between that as well, one of the highest selling artists in auction. But then there's the other side, like Ai Weiwei, for instance, who rebels against the Chinese government, right? But there's so many people, right? I can just say, a few names, and you probably wouldn't have heard of them, but they're massive in the art space. Why? Because they're not commercial to you particularly. And I think that is fine. That's just as fine as when you start saying Zara versus CDG mainline. Like, there's spectrums in all things, really.
That says Bauhaus was all about art being mass produced and functional. I mean, I get it. Like, I get it in the sense that, like, technically anything can be, because I know people go with this like mentality of like, anything can be. It's kind of, we're getting into the like Deschamps sort of realm where it's like,
it's postmodernism.
Yeah, it's like, it just gets confusing at that point where it's like, like if I change the context of what this thing is, then who is to say it isn't art? And obviously you can have that conversation, it's valid, but that's just my opinion. I think it's just a spectrum, and some fashion brands and people that work in fashion exist on one side, and some people exist on the other side.
Leo said, damn it, here we go with Duchamps. Yo, okay, let me just say this with the Bauhaus thing. I feel like some things in history can be misconstrued based on the way that people document things, right? What Bauhaus did for a lot of people was, in a post-war era, create a job classification, right? And that job classification is generally designer, product designer, industrial designer, and design engineer. And then all of the things that spidered off from that, in terms of like, you now have people that are 3D designers, or textile people that just make textiles and all of these other things, right? For Bauhaus particularly, their integral point wasn't necessarily to sell. It was to be a place, a home for people who wanted to create at the highest level outside of, let's say, a standard university system. They were like almost juxtaposed in an instance to standard education because of the way that people were educated back then. It wasn't necessarily to say, oh, we want to be commercial, but in terms of the history of each individual artist, they had to leave Bauhaus, yes, because they were broke, but not because they wanted to leave there. So there's a little bit of mixed history, but the value that Bauhaus brought to, let's say, Dieter Rams, for instance, some people can say Dieter Rams is an artist. If you want to, that's fine. But his era was, birthed from what happened in Bauhaus, in terms of, okay, we are designing for, not just beauty, but function. So I don't want to ramble on, but I love House and I love these brands,
No,
but
no, no, no.
they
I think what you said is valid. I think what you said is right. But that's what I said. Like the postmodern conversation. To be fair, sometimes it gives me a headache because
you're
one
so
thing I
real.
don't like. One thing I don't like is when things have no meaning. You know when like people say, "Well, this can be this, so this can be this, so this can be this." It's basically me. If we do that, words don't have meaning and language ceases to exist. You know what I mean? That means if I say hello, hello could mean goodbye, and goodbye could mean tomorrow, and tomorrow can mean. I just don't like when it comes to those kind of things. I have a tendency to not agree with that.
No, I totally understand. And, you know, just to piggyback off that, the
Hmm.
history when Bauhaus was created, that because even Duchamps and, you know, man of that era did not want what we're saying right now, which is the funnier part about it. I like, remember back in the day when you read I believe it was the Schiaparelli book and it was talking
Yeah,
about surrealism and all of that type of stuff.
yeah,
I like that
yeah.
was a great video. I don't know whether anyone is on his Patreon, sub to his Patreon, but there's so much value in that book of just like cultural context and clues. So imagine you're in a world now with Duchamp and there is this idea that anything can be and then surrealism, right? Those
Yeah.
like came out of point and like there were so many different places like performance art, all of these things kind of spawned from that, but you are now turning language on its head to fit your perception because when they say anything can be art, they're not saying, oh, you know, a toilet can be art. He wasn't saying that. He was saying that you guys that want us to go to these Paris salons and, you know, you pick an artist based on, you know, their classifications and saying, oh, this person knows how to paint and render really well. That is not the idea of art that we want alone. We want
Right.
all of these things to be art. Not to say, oh, this pack of crisps can be art now. We want all of these things to be art. And artists decided, yo, we like it was like, and the best thing about Bauhaus it was that it helped spawn an industry of designers that, yo, yeah, you want to be an artist, but at the same time, you need to pay the bill, which is perfectly
Yeah.
so. Like these people designed so many things and Campbell soup cans, and then you know you have Warhol, who invented pop art thereafter.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the timeline because you know, as like someone who studies art, it's like you have to see the timeline and in this cultural context. But yeah, like they just didn't want, oh, I have to paint this and I have to paint like this in this Paris salon to be considered an artist. That is one of the things that they wanted.
It's just sorry, I'm just reading these comments.
He said, no, he mentioned Andy. You know what? In my next, if we continue on with this, I don't feel like we will, but I won't.
Someone literally just said Chris a work of art because of the crunch.
Work of art.
Let's see. Culture says I actually disagree with Dami's analysis, but I'm an artist. That's interesting. Culture, I'd love to know your perspective because obviously we are always open to different perspectives. I'd love to know, especially from an artist, because I mean I'm not an artist, so it'll be good to get your perspective. Italian art is based on quality of construction, craftsmanship. Italian art. What do you mean by Italian art? Okay, Italian art is car design, everything outside fashion. Okay. I mean, if we're gonna talk about cars, I mean, and I like Italian cars more than the next guys, like, you know, Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, I'm all for it. But it depends what you mean by craftsmanship in a car. Is craftsmanship the design? Because I definitely think that Italians make the best designed anything, like motorbikes, Ducati, like, you know, cars, Ferrari, Alfa Romeo. Yes, I can agree with that. If we're talking like craftsmanship in terms of quality, a lot of the build quality of a lot of Italian cars are questionable. Like Alfa Romeo, that's one of my favorite car companies, by the way, and like the build quality of some of their cars is extremely questionable. So I think it depends what direction you come at it from. Because I heard Alfa Romeos were actually poorly made. I think they've improved slightly, but yeah, there was a point in time when the reliability and the build quality of Alfa Romeos were absolutely atrocious. And I say this as someone who, like, my dad was really into Alfa Romeos and always drove Alfa Romeos when I was a kid. And then I'm into Alfa Romeos for that same reason. So I've seen different generations. So yeah, it depends. Like when we say craftsmanship, like what do we mean?
Victor Hart said sometimes Italian products are built in different countries and they slap made in Italy on.
This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club, where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.